Welcome back to Sputnik. At the end of this month, in the prestigious headquarters of the TUC in London, a galaxy of star speakers, yes, including yours truly, will gather for a conference on Latin America.
Prime among this August lineup will be Dr. Aleida Guevara. She's the daughter of Che Guevara, a man whose star shines even brighter in Argentina than Lionel Messi, even though Che hasn't been around to score a goal for 47 years.
One of the conference organizers is Matt Willgress of the Venezuela Solidarity Campaign, and we're glad to welcome him on board the Sputnik. Matt, we'll talk about Venezuela in a minute, but tell us about this Latin America conference. What's the range of subjects, speakers, organizers, and how do people, even at this late hour, get to it?
Thanks, George. The Latin America conference is on Saturday, November 29th at TUC Congress House in central London. You can register or get the programme at www.latinamerica2014.org.uk. In terms of the agenda of the day, there's over 25 different workshops covering all aspects of Latin America, country-specific workshops on Cuba, Colombia, Venezuela, which I'm involved in, Ecuador, Nicaragua, Bolivia and so on, but also topics on themes, so looking at things like the role of Latin America in providing solidarity to the Palestinians and working for peace in the world, the role of free education and the student movements in Latin America. Che Guevara's daughter, Aleida Guevara, is like the keynote speaker of the conference this year, and she's speaking in, I think, 4 different sessions. One, a sort of a plenary session to the whole conference, 2 organised by the Cuba Solidarity Campaign, 1, I think, with your good self. And then she's also introducing a film that she made about the late Hugo Chavez in another session as well, which I'll be introducing alongside her.
Well, that allows us to segue into Venezuela. It's 2 years ago. You and I were on the streets campaigning in Chavez's last victory.
And you know, this one scene that we witnessed that stays in my mind so strongly when we were walking the streets of Caracas. There was this argument between this elderly lady and a young school student. And they were quite loud about it. And it turns out that she was angry at the young boy for calling her a capitalista. Amazing. Only in Venezuela. Only in Venezuela, I thought.
I think he called her that because she had a nice coat on. It was quite an unfair allegation. But the one I remember is, as we stood, in fact, I shed a tear, this large group of very poor women moving along the street, joyously singing Chavez, Corazón del Pueblo, the heart of the people. It was a simply unforgettable visit, and he seemed like a bull that day in the rain.
In the rain.
And yet he was taken from us so swiftly. How's the country coped with the loss of President Chavez?
Well, I think the immediate aftermath of President Chavez's death obviously saw a great outpour of grief and sympathy, and, you know, literally hundreds of thousands of people on the streets. They had to keep the coffin open for days and days on end so everyone could go and pay their respects. But I think what is concerning is that people who are opposed to the sort of elected government in Venezuela and the Chavista project, if you like, have seen the death of Chavez as an opportunity to destabilise and undermine the revolution, and in their eyes ultimately overthrow the successor to Chavez, the elected former trade union leader and foreign minister Nicolas Maduro. And so in the last year, basically last year and a half, Maduro's been elected, and since January we've seen different attempts from the sort of extreme elements of the right-wing opposition in Venezuela to undermine and destabilise the elected government. And I think we should also remember on a show like this that the US role in supporting and funding to the tunes of millions of dollars those extreme right-wing elements in Venezuela. So as a campaign, we've sort of titled what's going on as After Chavez, the Empire Strikes Back. And so there's a number of concerning elements to the situation at the moment for people who support democracy and social progress in Venezuela.
Well, the United States supports democracy so much they're ready to spend billions to overthrow the product of it. They have done in the Ukraine successfully, and they are trying so far unsuccessfully to do the same in Venezuela. But what about the local actors? There appears now, I'm sorry to say, to be the development of a kind of death squad potential. I lived through the death squads in El Salvador and in Nicaragua, and I saw for myself with my own eyes some of their grisly handiwork. A very young Chavista parliamentarian was murdered horrifically with his partner at home. Tell us about that.
Well, recently, on the 1st of October, there was a murder of Roberto Serra, who was the youngest member of the National Assembly in Venezuela, a young lawyer, and the leader of the youth wing of the Socialist Party, which is the governing main political party in the parliament in Venezuela, to which the president belongs. And he was found murdered alongside his assistant in his home. And obviously there's police investigations and so on, criminal proceedings are ongoing. But the former president of Colombia, Ernesto Samper, who isn't a man of the left, but is now a leading figure in UNISOR, which is, in a simplistic way, is a bit like the Latin American European Union. He said that it showed a worrying infiltration of Colombian paramilitarism into Venezuela, and obviously far-right paramilitaries in Colombia have been a concern to supporters of democracy and the left for a long time. But also this, this tragedy comes within a historical context of the elements of the Venezuelan opposition consistently trying to do things outside the sort of electoral game, basically because they keep losing elections, and they've lost 2 elections, national elections, it should be remembered, since Chavez died. So if they were banking on Chavez dying to mean they would come back immediately to power, the electoral route didn't provide that. So some elements, obviously, of the opposition in Venezuela are looking at all sorts of different things. So earlier in the year, we had the La Salida movement, which I think you covered on this very programme, which was a sort of series of violent street actions aimed at destabilising the situation in Venezuela, but that sort of died out.
They've died out now.
But, a number of innocent people lost their lives as a result of that, and the stated aim of that campaign, political aim, was the ousting of the constitutional and elected government before the end of its term. So we need to be very vigilant about the situation in Venezuela.
And are the Chavistas vigilant?
I think so. I think a lot of people, obviously, the situation, you get a lot of media misrepresentation here in Britain about it, but the situation earlier in the year, all things considered, at the end of that, President Maduro still had much higher approval ratings than the opposition. The country sort of got back to normal and, continues to try and announce a whole wave of new programmes and social progress in a number of issues. So I think, speaking personally, I've been immensely impressed with President Maduro's leadership in what obviously was Chavez dying first, then this violent campaign, and now things like this assassination is not an easy time.
No, he's been a towering presence in the last year and a half.
Literally.
But I'm wondering, yes, literally. I'm wondering how united the left is in Venezuela. One hears or reads stories, admittedly, in hostile newspapers, and I don't read Spanish, so I don't really get the other side. I'm wondering, we hear these stories about pro-Chavez revolutionary people sort of taking the law into their own hands and not being happy with this or that aspect of the new government. Tell us about that.
I think you're right, there's people obviously who have a interest in opposing the revolution, and the government exaggerate divisions in Venezuela on the left. But equally, Venezuela isn't, it's a new sort of form of 21st century socialism in its own eyes, which is evolving. So it isn't a one-party state. And within the left, although nearly everyone is in the United Socialist Party, which brought together over 40 organisations, there are other organisations like the Communist Party of Venezuela and some sort of the PPT and others that support the government that aren't in that. So there will be disagreements on a political level between those parties, for example. But at the Congress of the governing party, which was quite recently, the reports I read in Spanish, the majority of them, like the main people who organised a sort of opposition press conference saying they were sort of opposed to Maduro but were Chavista, weren't even delegates to the conference. They organised a sort of, I think a very small group of people. And also I think we have to be very wary of a lot of these media stories about people taking the law into their own hands unless we know the specifics of the case. But I think in terms of the discussions going on since Chavez and Chavismo, it's also important to understand that, and going back to the conference that we discussed, that there's also a regional unity emerging in Latin America amongst the left, which strengthens Maduro's hand in that situation.
Yes, it does,
well.
and indeed even unites people who are not all entirely of the of the left, but who could be described as patriotic Latin Americans. Tell us finally about the Venezuela Solidarity Campaign. How do people join it? What does it do?
So the Venezuela Solidarity Campaign next year will be celebrating our 10th anniversary. I think George is doing one of these events in February. I don't know if he knows that yet. But we'll be having a season of events to celebrate our 10-year anniversary. If people want more information or to join, they can go to www.venezuelasolidarity.co.uk. We've got a wide spectrum of support. We work closely with a group of people in Parliament. We've had backing from the TUC and most of the trade union movement. And we see our aims in a lobbying sense as to lobby that the British government doesn't follow the hostility of the US administration towards Venezuela, which is very real, and the threat of US sanctions is not just on the table, but is slowly being rolled out now as Obama reacts to the Republicans going to the Senate and so on. But also to tell the truth about Venezuela and to present a picture that we regard as a more real picture of Venezuela than you see on the media, a picture of, you know, mentions the gains in health and education and poverty reduction and so on, which isn't to say there isn't problems in any country, of course. But it doesn't give, you know, it gives a counter to the relentless negative coverage that sadly we see in so much of the media.
Fairness in the British media. I saw a pig flying by. Matt Willgress, thanks for joining us on board the Sputnik.